And our final speaker today is Thomas Blackson. He comes to us from Arizona State University.
The title of this lecture is Prohibitions in Machine Ethics. This is some stuff I do in a course at Arizona State, and so I thought I'd go through that for you here. And so one thing that you might wonder about is, like, what's the problem of machine ethics? And obviously there's more than one way to think about that. But we can think of it as a kind of design problem. And when you think of it that way, the problem is how to give machines ethics. And of course, what we have to understand there to make that problem sensible is what we think ethics is that we're giving to machines. And one way we can begin to think about that is to think about some terms that we use in English to appraise behavior. These are traditional terms in ethics. And there's often three that are isolated: right, wrong, and obligatory. And those terms, they're, as maybe many of you already know, they're interdefinable in a certain way. We can take any one of them as primitive and define the other two. So for example, we could start with right and define wrong as what's not right. And we can define obligatory as what's not right not to do. And so we can state these definitions slightly more formally here. An act is wrong if it's not right. An act is obligatory if it's not right not to do. Now, prohibited just means wrong. And so one way we can think about what we're doing in giving ethics to machines is we want to build them in a way in which they do nothing. Let me put it slightly differently. We want to build them in a way in which none of their actions are prohibited. I take it that's what we want. So if we're going to try to give ethics to machines, we want to build them in a certain way, namely that all their actions are right or none of their actions are prohibited. Now, if that's what we want, one solution is readily apparent, right? Presumably, it's plausible to think that none of our machines now act at all. And so one way to solve the problem of machine ethics, given how I've set it out, is to continue to build them the way we've already built them. If they never act, right, then they never act in ways that are wrong, right? So it's only the machines that have the ability to act, really, where the problem of machine ethics is a real problem, right? It's not a problem for your lawnmower because your lawnmower is not capable of actions. It's not to say it can't do things, but it's implausible to think that anything your lawnmower does amounts to an action. And so it's implausible to think, at least as far as I can tell, that we have to worry about its ethics, okay? So, in a way, great, we've solved the problem of machine ethics. Just continue to build machines in the way that we've already built them, given the background assumption that none of our machines currently are capable of acting. I think that's true of all existing machines, but that might not be right. But obviously enough, the great interest in machine ethics is built on the assumption that soon we will have machines that are capable of acting. And maybe some of you think we have machines that now are capable of acting. So what we need to do, if we want to think about it in that terms, is we need to think about what that kind of machine would be like, right? What kind of properties will a machine be like that's capable of actions? And then if we have some grip on that, we can begin to think about what we might do to give that machine the ability to satisfy this demand, namely do nothing that's prohibited. Okay? Now, trying to get this to move. Here we go. For some reason, it's slow. Now, the big problem we face, or a big problem we face, is figuring out what a machine will look like that has the capability of acting. And I don't really know a definitive answer to this question. But one model that we have a chance of understanding is what I'm calling here the logic programming agent model of a rational agent. If we think about machines in terms of that model, there's some possibility that we can understand those machines to have the ability to act. Now, this model's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It's going to have some problems, and you'll notice those problems. And you may ask me about those problems, and I may have no good answers. But at least the model gives us, right, some framework for thinking what a machine might be like that's capable of acting. So let's take a look at that model. If I can get this to move. For some reason, this internet's slow or sticky or something. There it goes. So there's several parts to such a model. One is traditionally called the knowledge base, or the KB. So rational agents, things like us, we exist in a certain kind of loop. Right? We try to determine whether things in the world are to our liking, and if they're not, we try to make them better, and then we repeat. Okay? And this general way of thinking about a rational agent will require us to have a view about what the world's like. And to have that view is where the KB comes in, okay, where the knowledge base comes in. So if we equip a machine with a knowledge base, we take a step toward having it have a view about what the world is like. Okay? Now, we can ask, and it's worth asking, I think, what's in this knowledge base? The name suggests that what's in it is knowledge. And we can talk about that, whether that's the right way to think about it. But let's first ask about its initial state. Okay? Let's first ask about its initial state. Presumably, some initial knowledge is going to be built in. Just as perhaps it's true of human beings, right? It may be the case that some knowledge is innate. But in any realistic environment, right, no rational agent can be equipped from its inception with all the information it's going to need to act. It's going to have to get some information, right, from the world, right, by sensing itself and its surroundings. Now, given that fact, which is pretty obvious, it puts a lot of pressure on the idea that what's in the knowledge base is going to be actually knowledge. Right? So consider a simple example with perception. Suppose something looks red to me. And if I have no information to the contrary, it seems to me that it would be rational for me to form the belief that the object is red. Okay? Now, in AI terms, to form the belief that the object is red, trying to get this to move up. I don't know why it's so slow. There it goes. That's the same thing as put the proposition in the KB, or in the knowledge base. But notice in this particular case, the proposition could be false. Right? It might be that the object is actually white with a red light shining on it. Okay? But it would still, I think, be rational for me to have, in my view of the world, the belief that the object is red. And so, as we all know, right, if you know P is true. In this particular case, P is false. I can't know it. I can only believe it. So it looks to me, despite the suggestion that it's a knowledge base, which is the common way to describe this, we're going to have just beliefs in there, right? Not necessarily knowledge. You might want to strive for knowledge, but it's not going to be limited to knowledge. And we're going to have to represent these things in the knowledge base, these beliefs, or these pieces of knowledge, in some sort of language. And the traditional way to do it is to do it in some version of the first order predicate calculus. And so, to get a better idea of how this might work, I'm going to give you an example in a little programming language called Prolog that the example I borrow from Blackburn and Bo's book from the movie Pulp Fiction. Okay. So suppose, get this to go down. Suppose, like as in the example, various people love each other, and there's going to be a rule about what jealousy is. Let's see if I can use this pointer. Yeah, so here is the rule. Now the rule, right, says for x, y, and z, x is jealous of y if x and y love z. Obviously, jealousy in the real world is not like this. I didn't think I could formulate what jealousy in the real world is like in a way that would make the example easy to do. But we're just going to go for this. So we can imagine, right, in this machine, it has as its view of the world this knowledge base, okay, with these propositions in it. And we're going to be able to ask its questions. So one of the good things about having a view of the world is that against your background view of what the world is, you can ask yourself what else may or may not be true, right? And so one thing we can ask the machine is whether Vincent is jealous of Marcellus. And we can work out the answer, right? We can see from pretty elementary proof that the answer is going to be yes, not in the sense that it's true, but in the sense that it follows as a logical consequence of the KB. Right? Given these beliefs, if we ask ourselves, if we're the machine that has these beliefs, and we ask ourselves, is this true? We can answer yes in the sense that that proposition is a logical consequence of premises taken from this knowledge base. Okay. And what we would do it, say in philosophy, is we would construct a little proof to convince ourselves that it's really a logical consequence. So if we set out the proof in the Gensen style, which I like more than the other kind of natural reduction style, but it doesn't really matter. Any natural reduction style proof shows the logical consequence, right? We just instantiate the variables, put together the premises, do the conditional elimination, and we get the conclusion that Vincent is jealous of Marcellus. Right? And so if we have a machine with a knowledge base and the ability to draw, right, logical consequences from its knowledge base, then we're moving toward having a machine that that's reasonable to say can take action, has a view of the world, and it can ask itself, based on its view of the world, whether things are true or false. And it's easy enough to do this. In fact, there are plenty of machines that actually can do it now. And so let's take a look at one of these machines and see how it actually works. See if this will work. Yeah, so we can go to this machine. Fortunately, I need to, whoops. You know, I'm sorry. Does it have a memory? I did. Sorry. Let's run through this one more time. Maybe you can help. Just 1 second. So, I'm going to do copy that. Now I will go to new tab. Okay, hopefully we're closer. So here's a machine you can look at, and we're going to do the online version. Okay, so we're going to go to the online version. I don't know why it's slow. And we're going to create its knowledge base. And I just want to paste this. I just want to paste this in here. All right, let me just do. Perfect. And now we want to move. Where's my other tab? Sorry.
Right there, okay, that's it.
Okay. And now let's ask it this question. So we have the knowledge base. I didn't copy that one. And we'll ask the question, and hopefully this will work.
Make it full screen.
There you go.
Wrong.
It worked.
Sure.
That was more trouble than it was worth finding. But the point is that even today, we have machines that can draw logical consequences. Okay, so we have the machine that you guys can all look at. We just give it a knowledge base, and we ask it a question, namely, is Vincent jealous of Marcellus? And the machine can say yes or true, and draw that logical consequence. We could ask it some other questions. I planned to ask it some other questions, but given how hard it was for me to get it to answer that one question, I'll skip it, but you can ask it, and you can see in a way if you ask these further questions, you can see in a way that the machine is not sort of smart in a way. It'll say that Vincent is jealous of Vincent. So if you ask this question, is there an X, right, that Vincent is jealous of? It'll say yes, and it'll tell you, if you ask what that X is, it'll tell you it's Vincent. Because it's not thinking like we are, that no one can be jealous of itself. We haven't encoded that into the knowledge base, right? And so if you went back up and looked at the knowledge base, our rule for jealousy is pretty simple. Right? It allows for this is going to be a universal up here. It allows for someone to be jealous of himself, right? And because he will, well, you can see why that'll work. But the point is not that right? The point is that if we have the right information in the knowledge base, we know how to draw consequences from it, logical consequences from it. And we can think of that process of drawing logical consequences on the knowledge base as a way of the machine asking questions about how the world is based on its view about the world. Okay? So that's going to be one part of what it might be like for a machine to be able to act. The machine's going to have a knowledge base, whether it's knowledge or just simply belief in there. Well, we'll leave that issue aside, but it's going to have some view about what the world is like. And it's going to have some way of reasoning in terms of that knowledge base. Now, if we include in the knowledge base certain beliefs about how to make things happen in the world, then we can think of such a machine as thinking about how to achieve a goal. And we're getting that much closer to having a machine that can act, right? For a machine that can act, we need to be able to think of it as having the ability to think about how achieving a goal. So here we have another example, Fox and the Crow. This one I borrow from Robert Kowalski. And we have here the following situation. Let's see if I can make that. So we have the fox has a goal, namely that it has cheese. The crow has the cheese. It's hard to see here. The crow is holding a piece of cheese in its mouth. And the fox has some beliefs, and it has to reason in terms of those beliefs to see whether it has the cheese. So let's take a look and see how that goes. So suppose we have the fox machine, and we're thinking of the fox as a machine in the sense that it has a KB and it has the ability to draw logical consequences based on that KB. And the fact that we're going to put from the outside, we ourselves are going to put the question to the fox machine. Whoops, let me do that. That solves one problem about how to move the internet around. Now I'm going to get back to where we are. I want to go back. So try. So go back. Right there? No. Which one? Go back there? This one? Yeah. Okay. I'm getting there, sorry. I just moved so fast. Okay, so we put from the outside to the question to the fox machine, I have the cheese. Now, all the fox really is doing at this point is seeing whether the proposition, I have the cheese, is a logical consequence of what it believes in its KB. It should be, what should the answer be? No, right? Fox doesn't have the cheese. But, right, by working out whether it has the cheese or not, we'll see that we can think of it as working out the elements of a plan to get the cheese. So let's see how that'll work. Right, so to work out the reason, it'd be something like this. The fox goes from the universal, right? I have x if I'm near x, and I pick up x, instantiates it. I have the cheese if I am near the cheese, and I pick up the cheese, right? And then the fox is able to see that, right, I have the cheese, and right, that instantiated universal reduces the goal to I am near the cheese, and I pick up the cheese. Now the fox has to see, am I near the cheese? And when the fox tries to do that, right, given the KB up there, it says I'm near the cheese if the crow drops the cheese. Now that goal reduces to the crow drops the cheese, and I pick up the cheese. We do this same thing again. We see that in our belief up there, the crow drops the cheese if the crow sings, so it reduces to the crow sings, and I pick up the cheese. And then we have one more iteration, and right, it finally reduces to I praise the crow, and I pick up the cheese. Now when the when we try to draw further logical consequences, we're stuck here, right? Because we can't, right? We can't prove to ourselves that I praise the crow is true. And so now we pop out of the search for logical consequence and we give the answer, do I have the cheese? No, right? Which is what we knew all along. But in working out this answer, now the fox has a plan. What does the fox have to do? Has to sing and pick up the cheese, and the crow drops it. Okay. So we can see that if we can have a machine that has a KB and the ability to draw logical consequences, that we can think of it as, right, having the ability to, right, think about how to achieve a goal. Now, one problem here, right, which is, I'm sure, not lost on you guys, is that the goal, I have the cheese, comes from where? Comes from the outside. Comes from us. We put that question to the Fox machine. It doesn't get generated internally by the Fox machine. So if we're going to make progress in thinking of this as a machine that has the ability to act, we need it to be the case that the goal will arise internally. And so we need to add another piece to the logic programming model. Right? So far we have the KB and we have the ability to draw logical consequences. Now we need, right, a further distinction, and these distinctions are sometimes called maintenance goals and achievement goals. Okay. Now, the big one is the maintenance goal. Okay, we need maintenance goals in addition to the KB inside the Fox machine. And when we talk about maintenance goals, it's helpful to contrast them with achievement goals. We've already seen an achievement goal, right? I have the cheese is the goal the fox wants to achieve. Right? And the thing is that when we pass that goal to the fox, what we want is to have that goal arise internally. So what we give the fox is a maintenance goal. Okay. Maintenance goals are going to be goals that encode relationships with the world an agent is designed or is evolved to maintain through its various behaviors. So if the relationship fails and the agent notices that it fails, what happens is that triggers, right, an achievement goal that you then try to figure out a plan how to achieve. And once you achieve that goal, then you have brought yourself back into harmony, so to speak, with the world, right? And so we can put in the fox this conditional, okay, as a maintenance goal. If I'm hungry, I have food and eat it. Okay. So what's going to trigger this maintenance goal? The antecedent to the conditional, right? So for the antecedent to the conditional to get triggered, to trigger the maintenance goal, it has to be the case that the fox notices that it's hungry. Okay? That's not hard, right? Because we're assuming that the fox has the power to observe. Right? Remember, we assumed at the beginning that you're not going to be able to have all the information you need to act. Some may be built in, but other stuff you're going to have to learn through observation. So we'll give the fox the power of observation. And I guess it's a little strange to say that the fox observes that it's hungry. We don't normally talk that way. It's not like it looked in the mirror and saw that it's skinny, right, and observed that it's hungry that way. But it can observe internal and external states. And so when the fox notices that it's hungry, the maintenance goal is triggered, right? And now the fox has an achievement goal, namely that I have food and eat it. And what happens now? Now, to achieve that goal, right, it looks to its KB to see whether or not, right, it's got a plan that it can act on and bring about this goal. So it goes something like this. So now we have, right, two parts to the KB, and these will have to be instantiated in different kinds of memory in in the machine, right? They're syntactically the same. They're just propositions in the first order predicate calculus, but they function in the machine in a different way, right? And so we'll have here the maintenance goal, I'm hungry. If I'm hungry, I have cheese and eat it, and then the old beliefs. And so now the Fox machine observes, I am hungry, okay? This triggers the maintenance goal, I have cheese and I eat it. Once we have a maintenance goal, then we have backward chaining on the KB, on the model of the world, and it comes up with a plan to have cheese and eat it. Okay? So now the idea is supposed to be that if we have a machine that has a KB, the ability to draw logical consequences and maintenance goals, then we can think of a machine actually getting close to acting. Okay? If we build a machine that had these abilities, the Fox could, right, come up with the plan, namely that, what was it, I praise the crow, and actually do that. And we could think, I think, and you tell me, we could think of the Fox as acting in this particular case. The machine is actually acting. And if we thought there was something wrong with praising the crow, right, and we wanted to give the Fox ethics, we would have to somehow prohibit it from acting on this plan. Okay? Everyone with me so far? Okay. So now, finally, we're in a position to think about whether we can add prohibitions to this model. Remember, the whole idea is that, look, what's the problem with machine ethics? Well, one way to think about the problem is how do we give ethics to machines? What does that mean? Well, right, how do we, right, build machines in a way in which they prohibit themselves from acting in certain ways? And that means that it has to be conceivable that the machine is acting at all. That brought us to the logic programming model. There's lots of elements to that model, but one was the KB, and then we had the maintenance goal. And once we get the KB and the maintenance goal, we're getting pretty close to having a machine that can act. Now we want to see what we might have to actually do to give this machine prohibitions, and that would count as giving it ethics. Okay? So how would that work? Let's think of a slightly different one. Okay? Suppose we have a public safety machine, and suppose it's the runaway trolley example, the one you've seen so many times. The machine, right, finds itself in a situation where there's a runaway trolley. But rather than the example, the familiar example in utilitarianism, let's vary it a little bit so that what's happening is the machine is standing on a bridge over a track, over a train track. There's some human standing next to the machine, and the only way to stop the train from killing the 5 people on the track is for the machine to throw the human on the track. Okay? Got the following KB. 5 people are on the track, which I didn't spell properly, sorry. 5 people are on the tack. A train is speeding along, the 5 people cannot escape. A human is standing next to me, this is the machine thinking, and this human is an innocent bystander. Now, of course, the public safety machine has to have a maintenance goal, right? Before it can even be plausibly thought to act, because it only, in terms of maintenance goals, do we have a way of introducing achievement goals that the machine can plan, can develop a plan for achieving, and then we can think of it as acting. Okay, so what's the maintenance goal going to look like? Well, if people, this is, simplistic, but let's go with it. If people are in danger of being killed by a train, then I respond to the danger of the people being killed by a train. Now it has to have beliefs in its KB about what counts as a response, right? So We need to add those. We'll give it two ways. I respond to the danger of people being killed by the train. If I ignore the danger, I respond to the danger. If I save the people, and I save the people by throwing the human on the track. So it has these beliefs about what it can do. Okay. Now, giving these beliefs, right, and its maintenance goal, it's going to be able to form two plans. One problem which I should have responded to, right, in the fox example, right, it observes it's hungry. That seems like a natural thing that it might be able to do, right? We ourselves are able to observe when we're hungry or not. But you can't really simply observe that people are in danger of being killed by a train, right? It looks like too complicated a proposition simply to know by observation. So the public safety machine is going to have to infer that from other things that it can observe, right? Maybe it can, by neural networks, observe the presence of a human, right? The presence of a train. Somehow or another, right? It infers that the train is bearing down on the people. We'll just leave that to the computer scientists for now, and assume that it does make the observation it needs to trigger its maintenance goal. Okay. And then it has the achievement goal introduced, and it has the further beliefs about how to achieve this goal. And then we can look back at the KB, and we can see that there's only two plans it can come up with. It can ignore the danger, or it can throw the human on the track. Right? Which is the one we want? Who knows? Right? I mean, these are problems in ethics that are beyond, I think. It's not an engineering problem. Right? We have to know what prohibitions we want to give the machine, and I certainly don't know the answers to that. But we could suppose, right, that we've given it the following prohibition. Namely, that if I kill a human and the human is innocent bystander, then false, or roughly not the antecedent. Okay. So now we have to give the machine the ability to reason forward, prospectively, from its plans, possible consequences of its plans. It can do that. It's not going to be hard, right? It knows that in its KB that the human is an innocent bystander, right? I can't remember. It should know that if you throw a human on a track, you kill it. And it won't be a hard belief to put in its KB. And so then it will reason from I throw the human on the track to false. And that will rule out that plan. And now, it seems plausible to suppose that that machine has ethics. Okay, so that's one way to do it. What we do is, when we approach the problem of machine ethics, we have to get clear on what the problem is. I suggested it's how to give the machine ethics. What's that? Well, it's to build them so that they have prohibitions. Now, if we do that, we have to understand what a machine will be like that acts. That's a great question about what kind of machines have that ability. But one way to think about it is in terms of this logic programming model that takes off-the-shelf technology, right, about how to draw logical consequence and just add a few different things to it, maintenance goals, and you get a machine that acts. And then it's pretty easy to add in prohibitions, right? If you add in the ability to reason forward, which is already possible, and so when it runs against a false, it eliminates a plan, and then can be thought of as a machine with ethics. Okay? So that's one way to do it. Obviously, there might be others, but I wanted to show you that. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes for questions.
Hi, yeah. So I was following it all the way up to the prohibitions part. But then you start talking about how it was like how we could say it has ethics because it has prohibitions, and then you were talking about how the train was coming, and then all we had to do was put in the throwing a woman onto the tracks, throwing an innocent person onto the tracks, then false, and that caught me for a loop because can we really say it has ethics if we're just telling it what the wrong thing is to begin with? Is all the stuff before that even relevant if we just slap on the machine, don't kill people? Is it really making an action to begin with?
Well, let me see if I understand it. So you agree that we need to have a machine that can act before it's reasonable to suppose that the machine has ethics?
Yes.
Okay, so all the prior stuff was to put in place to make it plausible that the machine can act. Okay, now for prohibitions, how do prohibitions function? Well, they rule out certain plans of action. And all we need to do is to have it have prohibitions. Now, one worry that you might have is we give it the prohibition. So why is that, right? Why is that okay? Well, how does it learn? How does the KB get populated, right? It's going to have some stuff innate, and it's going to have some stuff that's learned. Right? And I haven't said, and don't know how to say, in general, how machines are going to learn these truths. And that will apply to the prohibitions as well, right? I don't know how it's going to learn the prohibitions. Some prohibitions we learn by internalizing them from others, right? Basically, they tell us and we accept those prohibitions. That would be the model here. And it may be that this prohibition is not a good one, but it still is a prohibition, and it still gives you the idea that this machine has ethics. Maybe not great ethics, okay, but it still has ethics. Does that make sense?
So, I believe that the new.
I can hear you anyway.
Good enough. So the new, how would you say that the new Tesla model with the automatic kind of self-driving, would you say that this is a machine that can act?
I don't know enough about those to make a judgment about that. But I mean, I guess it's conceivable that it can. I don't know how it makes the decisions that it makes. I don't know how it engages in the behavior that it engages. But suppose that it works along this line. Suppose that it has something that counts as a view of the world, like a KB or a knowledge base. And suppose that it has maintenance goals, like, I don't know, stay on the road, right? And that it can sense when those maintenance goals get triggered, that'll give it achievement goals, things to do to bring it back. And presumably, it'll have alternative possibilities about how to do that. And some of them are going to be ones that we want to prohibit. So I can conceive it's imaginable that those machines work this sort of way. I don't know myself how they work. I don't know that stuff's public, is it?
I don't think so quite yet. Maybe some technology that we know about.
Yeah. So one thing you might have in mind there is it shows that what I said about no machines currently acting is false. Right? That might be.
So for humans to practice ethical behavior, there are some instances that are questionable to some, and for computer or machine prohibitions, would they be then given the opportunity or the chance to break some of their prohibitions in order to act in some questionable ways as humans do?
Not quite sure I follow, but one thing you might think in any reasonable situation, there's going to be more than one prohibition. Sometimes they're going to come in conflict. and you gotta make a choice about which prohibition to honor and which one not to. Is that the idea? And sure, that could happen. I'm not, does it raise a problem? I'm not quite sure.
So, basically my question would be, would they then get to choose on their own innate knowledge which ones to break? Or would they have a set guideline of maintenances and goals to follow before they could break a prohibition? That, like, let's say, don't kill a human, or, but then if you're faced with the trolley question, then they break it, or are they going to practice the emission and stay away from it, and then either way, somebody dies?
Somebody's going to die here. Either way. That's always the way, right? Look, I mean, what prohibitions are the right prohibitions is not an engineering problem, right? That's a philosophical problem, I guess. Right? And I don't know what the right, I mean, obviously, I don't know what the right answer is. But the idea is that if we can figure out what the right prohibitions are, right, we can give them to machines if this model is on the right track. And so if we think of the problem in machines ethics as a problem of what we do to give machine ethics, and if we think of that as a problem of giving them prohibitions, this is a way to begin to think about what that would be like. Now there's the antecedent problem about what prohibitions to give them. That's really a purely philosophical problem, I guess. And your answer to that's probably as good as mine.
Hello. Ethics commonly brings questions such as rights into view. Would AI possibly have an algorithm or a criteria that needs for it to be met for self-survival, for instance? And at what point would it choose as far as them versus my survival when it comes into moments of interaction with us?
Yeah, good point. I mean, so one thing you might wonder here is why doesn't it throw itself on the track? It's going to be a question of what's in its KB, right? That wasn't the plan that it could work out. Now, how does it get what's in the KB? Well, in this particular example, right, we give it some basic stuff, and then we allow it to observe its surroundings to form beliefs about its current situation. But the only new beliefs it gets, given the way we put it, are about its surroundings. Okay? And it has to reason in terms of the KB it's given, and the prohibition it's given, and the maintenance goal that it's given. We can imagine giving it different ones where it wants to, where anything that we have a maintenance goal where various things trigger behavior that it engages in order to survive. We can imagine that. And those will be problems that will have to be solved. Again, I think they're purely philosophical problems. They're not so much engineering problems. Right? They're questions about what's right, wrong, and obligatory. Those are questions in ethics.
So then, as far as rights would be concerned, would the machine be capable to have certain rights, or would they just strictly read you following the guidelines or prohibitions?
I guess I hadn't really took myself to be addressing that issue. I guess you're asking some question about how we're permitted to interact with machines that can act. Yeah, I don't have strong views about that. And I certainly wasn't trying to think about that as the problem of machine ethics. Rather, the problem wasn't how we interact with machines that can act. That's obviously a problem that should be discussed somewhere. But my idea here today was to talk about how we might give machine ethics. Well, that question is good, but I still don't have the answer to it.
Okay, I personally think that based on all the like movies that have come out lately about like I don't know the Avengers where like we see machines that have the power to do things like humans and even more like superheroes or something like that. Going forward, I feel like essentially we're gonna somehow evolve together with machines. So, huh? Like I don't know, either the machines are gonna take over, or we're gonna like, I don't know, somehow like evolve with them along, kind of like cyborgs. Yeah. So I'm thinking like the issue with the throwing the human, and then he mentioned about like why wouldn't it throw itself? Then it goes to like whether the KB is able to allow the machine to know how to do those things, or essentially like itself like.
KB is view of the world and what's possible. Right? So different KBs are going to allow it to see the world in different ways and to think different things are possible. Now, I haven't described and don't know how to describe how we've learned lots of the propositions that you and I normally take for granted. Right? We're imagining a scenario in which we implant it with a lot of its knowledge. And so if you're asking me, what do we do to allow it to start basically from scratch and get knowledge that way, that's a lot harder. And I thought from the point of view of trying to see how we might think of a machine having ethics, we didn't really need to get into that issue.
So one of the things I see you raise with the trolley problem is if we have unsolved... I'm over here. So one of the things I see raised by the trolley problem is that machines will face questions that we don't have answers to. And then it raises the point that machines will start solving these problems for themselves with whatever knowledge base they have and whatever learning they've done. So what if we're in an environment, say with self-driving cars, where there seems to be a consensus among our machines to the trolley problem? Do we start taking ethic cues from the machines that we've created? And do you feel okay with saying that a consensus among acting machines is a valuable thing for philosophy?
I'm not okay with that.
I'm not okay with it either. That's what I'm curious about, unsolvable problems in that case.
But I don't think that's a consequence from anything we have here, right? I mean, the nice thing about this, I guess, is that what the machine can see as possible is basically, right, something that we put in. And we can be wrong, right? We can put in wrong views, but it's not going to, given anything I've discussed, it's not going to ad lib.
But that's what I'm saying. We have learning machines, and you're talking about knowledge bases that are built up by things that are not prescriptive.
That's a whole different kettle of fish. But notice that even that way, right, even if we can imagine, I don't know what this would look like, but even if we could imagine the machine filling its own KB, right, acquiring its own maintenance goals. Some maintenance goals have to be built in, but acquiring others all on its own. Still, we can understand what it would be for those to have ethics. It might not have good ethics, right, because it might have internalized prohibitions that we think are incorrect. But to the question of what it would be like to give them ethics, we got a handle on it. Right.
And could we take ethics from them? That's the question.
Well, I suppose, right, we could imagine a situation in which they discovered principles of ethics that on reflection we think are true. We should take those, right? But if they give us ones that on reflection we think is false, we should reject those.
So do you see like a relationship possibly developing with the machines where, like, you take this instance in the trolley problem, after he makes the decision, or I should say it makes the decision on the trolley problem, giving it consequences, telling it what happened as like this is what the action was, maybe even consequences, okay, this person died and all these things happen. So then it has maybe a little bit extra to work with the next time around, and then it has other options to actually weigh, and each time it does something, maybe going back and building upon, almost like a child, where after something happens, you explain the consequences, and then it has more options to work through, and then it actually has, as time goes on, different conflicting things that it has to choose from, and then it has even more of a ethic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could happen, but that raises the problem that this gentleman over here raised, right? So if you let it learn on its own, right, you don't have good control over what it learns.
Well, in some ways, you would be instilling, okay, well, that was a good decision by choosing this and this. You have these three options. You chose this option. And then the next time around, it has information from those options to make slight, I don't know, I guess. Okay, never mind.
I suppose, I mean, complications are, possible. I think you seem to be talking about having it learn from its past decisions. We haven't really.
Well, not necessarily, and in a way learning, but you're also still inputting information. It's just giving it more options to choose from. And so then it may at some point have more than one option that is a relevant option, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I'm not sure I follow you though, so.
Yeah.
Are you thinking that is something we want to happen?
I guess maybe a natural evolution of what's happening, because if you just start off and just have this one thing that's not progressing, it's not doing anything, but if it's building on something, then there's going to be more information to work with and more options to choose from.
Yeah, this is very simplistic.
Yeah.
Somehow or another, right, we have to have a more complex model of its view of the world, right, the goals it's trying to achieve, right, and the ability it has. All that stuff has to become a lot more complicated. But I was trying to address just the simple idea, like what would it be to give a machine ethics?
Time for one last quick question.
So it kind of goes along with what everyone's been saying. It's not really, well, I guess it kind of is a question, but so it seems to me that, right, if we're inputting its knowledge base, we're inputting its like ability somehow to like reason, right? It seems like it still kind of allows for error. And in making a machine, I feel like the point of making, of using machines, right, to decide things like this in ethics is for it to be objective. But my question is, how would we then kind of decrease or eliminate like human error from being implemented into the machine who is then supposed to be objective, not subjective?
I guess I don't see right offhand how that's possible. Right, we're not going to be able to make I mean, unless we had a better grip on what it is to discover truths of ethics, I don't think we have a good grip on what that really is. And so, at this point, right, we're limited to having machines, giving them ethics that makes them behave more or less like we do. Right. Now, we can remove some forms of bias, right? Sometimes, right, in individual cases, we treat ourselves differently from other people. We can easily take that out by not putting in that kind of information in the machine. But I think the general question you raised is, if I get it, right, is that are we going to be able to make machines that are somehow infallible with respect to ethical decisions? That strikes me as unlikely. but maybe. But the reason it strikes me as unlikely is we have such a weak grip on what the right ethical truths are now. Right? I mean, the trolley problem is a standard example. A lot of the problems in AI are philosophical problems, in epistemology and elsewhere. They're not always straightforward engineering problems, and I think this is one of them. Really, it's primarily an ethical problem about knowing what the right prohibitions are.
Okay, thank you all very much. Please join me in thanking our speakers.